Welcome! Reading Goodnight Stories with Bored Grandma. Hello, grandchildren. It's Grandma here. Did you brush your teeth? Are you ready for bed? If so, here we go. Tonight I'm going to read to you a book from my big book of fairy tales by Peter Stevenson. Retold by Louisa Somerville. Little Red Riding Hood. Once there lived a young girl who was known as Little Red Riding Hood because of the red cape that her grandmother had made for her. One lovely summer morning, Little Red Riding Hood waved goodbye to her mother and set off into the wood. She was on her way to take some freshly baked cakes to her grandmother, who was sick. "See you later, Mom," she called out. As Little Red Riding Hood skipped through the woods, a sly wolf greeted her with a smile. "And where are you off to, little girl?" asked the wolf. "To my grandmother's house," she replied, and skipped on. The wolf was clever. He called out to Little Red Riding Hood in his sweetest voice, "Why don't you stop and pick a lovely bunch of flowers to take to your grandma as well?" "What a good idea," said Little Red Riding Hood, bending down to pick the sweet blossoms. Right away, the wicked wolf decided to take a shortcut to Grandma's cottage. "First I'll get rid of Granny, and then I'll have Little Red Riding Hood for lunch," he declared, and off he raced by another path. Soon the wolf was knocking at Grandma's cottage door. "It's me, Little Red Riding Hood, Grandma," said the wolf in his high-pitched little voice. "And I've brought you a basket of cakes and some flowers." "Come in, my dear," said Grandma. The wolf crept into Grandma's bedroom, where she lay tucked up in bed. "How tasty you look," said the wolf. "Oi!" Grandma screamed and dashed into a cupboard. The wolf put on Grandma's nightcap and nightgown. Then he climbed into her bed to wait for Little Red Riding Hood. Soon Little Red Riding Hood came along, skipping down the path to the cottage. "It's so quiet," she murmured to herself, looking all around. The birds were not singing quite as prettily as when she had set off from home. The sun was not shining as brightly. She felt a chill in the air. She knocked at the door. "Grandma, I brought you some cakes," she called out. "Come in, my dear," growled the deep voice. Grandma's voice is strange, she thought. The door swung open with a slow creak, and Little Red Riding Hood stepped inside. "Hello, Grandma," she said. "How are you feeling? You sound awful." Grandma was tucked deep under the covers of her bed with her nightcap pulled down low over her face. Little Red Riding Hood stood a little way from the bed. "Oh, Grandma," she cried, forgetting her manners, "what big nose you have!" The wolf smiled. "Well, that's all the better for smelling your lovely cake with, my dear. Come closer so that I can see you better," croaked the wolf. Little Red Riding Hood came a little closer to the bed. The wicked wolf's eyes glittered in the lamplight. She thought they looked different from her grandmother's eyes. "Oh, Grandma," she cried, "what very big and watery eyes you have." Then she saw the wolf's big, bushy eyebrows peeking out from under the nightcap. "And your eyes are so bushy," she added. "Don't worry about my big eyes," said the wolf. "That makes them all the better to see you with, my dear." Little Red Riding Hood still felt nervous, however. There was still something about Grandma that wasn't right. But what could it be? Little Red Riding Hood came closer still, and the wolf grinned a wide smile at her. She noticed a row of very large white pointed teeth. She thought they looked different from Grandma's teeth. She came up close so that she was next to the wolf's head on the pillow. "Grandma," she squealed in terror, "your teeth are so huge and pointy." The wolf pulled down the blankets, grinned a great big grin, and bared all his huge white pointed teeth. "All the better to eat you with," the wolf yelled, and he began to growl a terrible growl. He sniffed the air with his great long nose and stared at Little Red Riding Hood with his big eyes. Then he licked his chops with his great big tongue. "I'm coming to get you," he screamed to Little Red Riding Hood, and she backed away. And with that, the wolf leaped out of Grandma's bed. "What a lovely snack you will make, my dear," he growled as he flew through the air towards Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood dropped her basket of cakes to the floor. "Help! Help!" she screamed at the top of her voice, but there was no one to save her. Just as the wolf was about to gobble her up, a kind woodsman burst through the door. He had heard Little Red Riding Hood's cries for help. He lifted his axe. "Come here, you sly old wolf," he yelled. "Time for me to go," said the wolf. The woodsman chased the wolf off into the woods. Then Grandma bursted out of the cupboard. She and Little Red Riding Hood hugged each other and cried for joy. "Let's hope that mean old wolf has learned his lesson this time," said Little Red Riding Hood as she watched him run down the path with the woodsman close behind. "I don't think that big bad wolf will ever bother us again," replied Grandma. As he ran through the forest, the wolf struggled to get out of Grandma's nightgown and nightcap. Eventually, he tore himself free of her clothes and disappeared into the darkness of the woods. Later that day, the woodsman brought Grandma's nightgown and nightcap back to her. As for the wolf, well, he was never seen again, and Little Red Riding Hood and Grandma lived happily ever after. Now off to dreamland you go.